Indigenous peoples. Indigenous peoples are sometimes called First People, Tribal People, or Native People. Indigenous groups makes up about 5% of the world's population. According to the UN, there are more than 5,000 tribes of indigenous peoples in the world. They are spread out over about 90 countries. Each indigenous group is unique, yet their cultures also share some characteristics. These groups usually have a special connection to the land they live or used to live on, and their way of life is closely tied to nature. Their ancestors lived there before colonialists or other groups invaded it. They often speak, or used to speak, their own unique language. They also tend to be a minority in their country. Many indigenous peoples have experienced that the authorities have tried to suppress or even eliminate their culture and force them to assimilate. Within the English-speaking world, there are many well-known indigenous peoples: the Native Americans, the Inuit in the Arctic, the Maori in New Zealand, and the Aboriginal people in Australia. There are also many indigenous peoples in Africa and Asia. The Sami are perhaps the most well-known indigenous group in Europe. They live in Norway, Sweden, Finland, and Russia. And then we go down to the Maori people. The Maori. The Maori came to New Zealand in canoes from the Polynesian islands around 1250 to 1300s. The Maori population suffered from epidemics and wars as a result of the European settlements from the 1700s. Many people died and some of the tribe disappeared. Today, the Maori make up 15% of the population. Many live modern Western lives, but there is still a gap between the indigenous peoples and the rest of the population. The Maori have lower income, higher unemployment, and more health problems, and higher crime rates than other groups in New Zealand. Many indigenous groups are endangered. Their cultures and languages are at high risk of disappearing. Since their homelands were often taken from them, large numbers of people with indigenous backgrounds have moved to the cities to get an education or to find work. Statistics show that indigenous people suffer from more poverty, malnutrition, and lower levels of literacy than the average population. Environmentalists claim that there is a lot to learn from indigenous peoples. Traditionally, their cultures have depended upon nature. Their ways of lives are often more environmentally friendly and sustainable. Today, many indigenous peoples' cultures are threatened by climate change and by the exploration of natural resources in the areas where they live. In recent years, there has been an increased focus on the rights of indigenous peoples. In 2007, the UN presented the Declaration of the Right of Indigenous Peoples. This declaration was made to stop discrimination against indigenous groups, to protect their culture heritage, and to make sure they get to take part in decisions regarding their territories and other matters that concern them. The declaration states that the indigenous peoples have the right to land and resources, and that their environment should be protected. Little by little, countries have started to look at their indigenous peoples as a valuable enrichment to their societies. Yep, that was it.